Thank you all for coming today. I was a little bit nervous, not because of my talk, but because I thought the first speaker was going to tell me to quit eating peanut butter. So thank you for being an advocate for peanuts. I don't know what I would do without it. Let me just throw this out there, and it's kind of hard with that bright light. When you hear of poverty, what is your mental model? What comes to mind when you hear about poverty? Just the word poverty. Back up. Anybody just say something?
Lack, deficiency.
Okay.
Not enough money for food.
Not enough money for food. And we've been talking much more about that lately in our research. Generational poverty, which is totally different than other types of poverty. Fewer chances.
Extraordinarily rural, extraordinarily urban.
Exactly, and I've worked in both situations, so it's amazing the difference in poverty in the two locations. Okay, thank you for participating. Sometimes we see poverty in different ways, and as a former, I'm going to address this from being a former classroom teacher and then a former principal. I am from rural North Alabama, and of course, and I went to well, then they didn't have kindergarten, so I went through 12 school with about 700 students, and then taught mainly in more rural than where I was even from in Limestone County. But then I was principal at Patterson Elementary in Montgomery, which was 100% poverty. We served 2 federal housing units, and that type, even though it's not, it is inner city for Alabama. But then I moved to Philadelphia, and then also lived in Atlanta for quite some time. And you see totally different situations in each of those locations, so thank you for mentioning that. Okay, when we look at poverty in Alabama, we have almost 900,000 people who live in poverty, and over 300 of those are children who live below the poverty line. And if you're in education, or your kids are in school, or someone in your family teaches, poverty is coming up more and more. When we talk to our superintendents and our K-12 partners, it's working with the students from poverty. We have a huge miscommunication or a gap between our teachers, who are predominantly white, female, middle class, and our students coming from poverty, and there's a lack of understanding between the adults in the building and the teachers in the building and the students in the building. Okay, homeless children. This is something that I had never heard of. Of course, when you're a teacher, you know what homeless kids are, but it's different. And then when you become an administrator, you learn that there's federal law that does dictate the label of homeless. And when you look through that, you'll say, we have to have ways to identify students who are homeless. So if you don't know when a child comes to school, now when I taught, I did know this, when children come to school, sometimes they don't know where they're going home. They don't know what bus to get on because mom has said to them, I'm not going to be home, you need to go home with grandma, you need to go here, you need to go there. So that was something, but when we see on TV students who are living in motels, they're considered homeless. If you're living in a trailer park because you don't have enough money to, it's not like people who set up residence in trailer park, but if you're having to live there because you don't have the adequate means to live in your home, then that's considered. Again, if you're living in your car and places like that, all those children are considered to be homeless, and the law requires schools to respond to certain ways. And oftentimes, homeless children are unseen. They come to school, they're clean, and if I had a couple hours to talk with you, I'd show you a video clip that they did with 60 Minutes several years ago, and they had these children that were identified by their schools as homeless who would talk to the cameras, and to hear those children talk will literally make you cry. They think it's their fault sometimes, you know, they know that their mom's not eating, she's saving the portions of the food for them and those kinds of things. But the homeless children tend to come to school clean, and you don't really know what their problems are, because a lot of times with teachers, if we don't have that relationship, we just see these clean kids who are getting their work done and they're not behavior problems, so we just kind of pass on by them. A few of the supports, of course, free meals. You have to waive fees for activities and extracurricular activities. If you have school supplies, uniforms, all those things, they have to be provided. Now, this is the one that kind of is a sticking point with educators, because transportation to and from school of origin, although that doesn't come up a lot with parents because sometimes they don't tell you, but if you had a child who was declared homeless and they were in Notasulga and they moved to the Lee County, let's say whatever is farthest from Notasulga, then if the parent requested, they would have to provide bus transportation all the way back to Notasoga. So that's something that is a K-12 issue of planning. Okay, when we look at individual risk factors of school failures, students who've been absent 20 or more times, and we hear, working with the schools, we hear this over and over again, student attendance is an issue. Well, you can't just say it and not do something about it. If you know that's one of the risk factors for a child not passing grades, elementary, I think, does a better job with this because they're little and they, you know, they get themselves to school the best way they can at the best time. And the older kids, sometimes they say, well, you know, if they're not riding the bus, then they're driving and this, and this. But, you know, I don't entertain excuses. But a lot of that disciplinary problems we know can be a problem, and we know that African-American male students are over-identified with our disciplinary referrals, and Office of Civil Rights is looking into that, and a lot of school systems are looking into that. And what are we doing about it? Does it have to do with the disconnect between the adults in the building and the children? And the one that really bothers me is attended 5 or more schools during a lifetime. Can you imagine if you're a child and you change one school and you're in one reading series or it's being taught in one way and you're in elementary and then you go to another school, if you're in Alabama and you're getting the ACC, our standards, the Alabama state standards, and then you go to another state, Georgia usually, it's very disheartening for a child. And then you look at these individual risk factors. We know some of our children have children. I have a great niece who's graduating this time. She had a child when she was, I think she just turned 16, but luckily she's graduating on time with her class, and it's because of family support. A lot of times, and we've seen this quite a bit, high school students or junior high students who are working to support the family. They're bringing home money to help mom pay bills, to help dad pay bills, and put gas in the car and that kind of thing. Family background, and when I look at this, I can't believe we use some of these. None of these are excuses, I don't believe in excuses, but we talk about it. And if you hear teachers talk, not effective, good teachers who care about kids, but you hear other teachers, well, they come from a single parent home. I came from a single parent home. Family receives assistance. Well, that's not a bad thing. It's not, you know, in political circles now, they talk about families who need assistance like it's a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. You've worked probably and paid something into that support system, and when you're down on your luck, you should be able to get that. Unemployment, ESL, and I'm working a lot with, TPI is working a lot with Lochapoka, and we have many students there who are now ESL students, and when you go there and you talk about DACA and Dreamers, and you realize that some of these students feel the rug being pulled from them and how scary that is to the little ones at the elementary and then the high school, they have real concerns. A sibling has dropped out of school and your parents did not graduate from high school. Okay, there's been a lot of research done on high poverty schools who are high achieving schools, and that's where I put my money. And that's what I like to talk about when I talk with teachers and leadership teams. And Eric Jensen has authored several books, but this one is Teaching with Poverty in Mind, What Being Poor Does to Kids' Brains and What Schools Can Do About It. Of course, you've gotten, they use the acronym SHARE, support the whole child. The child is not just an academic piece. They also have social, academic, emotional, and health needs. And we've seen this with our school shootings. We're starting to address the mental health issue. And when I was principal at Patterson, many of our children, the more you get to know them and you get to know the parents and you do a lot of home visits, you find that these kids are supposed to be receiving mental health services. Parents don't have a way to get there. So we were able to get some community grants, and we were able to hire a professional, a psychologist to come who they were supposed to be seeing anyway. So we just got that person to come to school, and then we had a parent coordinator who would go and pick up the parents if they, less than a mile, but sometimes, you know, we don't want to walk. I didn't want to walk up here. It was quite the steep walk. But anyway, hard data. We know about using data, but data is numbers, and children have faces, and that number has a face, and that number is a child. So you need to create a culture for using data to help students, not to harm students. Data should be used in a very helpful, supporting, loving way. You don't want to make excuses, and you want to remove your excuses and build support for students. I was reading and it was talking about, we say we have high expectations for all learners. If you've seen schools' vision, mission, goal statements, Yeah, we do have high expectations. However, when you say that, you have to build the support in. You can't just say we have high expectations, but where's the support to show that? What does that look like? Relationship building with all students. And no matter what group I'm talking to, we have one superintendent, Tallapoosa, I'll just call him by name, Mr. Wendell. No matter what we're talking about, it's always, well, what is the relationship? What are you doing to build that relationship? Because everything boils down to relationships. I could talk all day long, and if I leave out relationships, I would be doing a misservice. Enrichment mind, we have to stop thinking about remediating our students and think about enriching our students. When I worked in Metro Atlanta, of course, there were tons of, thousands and thousands of ESL students there. And what I started doing with the ESL teachers there, I was early intervention program coordinator and a part of South Fulton. And rather than spending the whole time doing remediation, we would pre-teach. If they knew they were going to have we had the reading story for the next week, we would work with the teacher, get the vocabulary words and whatever the theme was, and just start talking with their students. And I was observing in that classroom, the first time we did it, I wanted to see. And those children came in and they started talking about vocabulary. You know, that's always what you do on Monday when you introduce a new story. And those ESL students were raising their hands. They knew I remember the word longing. What does longing mean? You know, most third graders aren't going to know. It means you want something. They were so excited because they had been pre-taught in a fun way, in a different way than how the teacher was going to teach it. So we need to stop doing so much, because with ESL students, there's only so much remediation you can do. So you really, if you start doing that pre-teaching and enrichment. Okay, here's my main topic, relationships. And of course, you can't have relationships without trust. And this is a former Miss America talking about trust being the most important part of a relationship, followed by communication. And resiliency, when I was an undergrad here, not an undergrad, when I was a grad student here at Auburn, I worked with a professor who was doing some research with Bonnie Bernard's research on resiliency, and I never forgot it. And that research led me through successful days at Patterson working with those kids. At the time, it was the lowest performing school in the state, and we reached up to academic clear because we were able to get rid of ineffective teachers, get effective teachers, and great PD, and we used our community. Each grade level had a church partner, and I was at a conference a few years ago, and they said, you can come in, oh, wait a minute. You can't come in the building talking about Jesus, but you can sure come in the building acting like Jesus. So I like that because, you know, we can't proselytize. We know that's against the Constitution, but you can come in. If anybody wants to come in acting like Jesus, we greatly appreciate that. So 4 categories related to resiliency are your individual attributes. Students who have that strong sense of self, they don't blame themselves for things going on. They have that strong internal locus of control. They don't blame themselves on their family's problems. They know it's completely separate from who they are. They have a positive attitude, and the next one is a positive use of time. They are planners. And when we work with our Lochapoka students, and I'm using them because we work with each grade level in high school, we bring them to campus several times a year. We have a summer camp for them. And thanks to Dr. Roy Rickers-Cook, who has a very strong compassion for students in that area, we are able to do a lot of work with them. And the thing that we work with them on the most is planning. And very pleased to say that we've seen some very nice results. Positive use of time also, and related to school. Children who have a majority of at-risk factors, they say they like to be involved in school. They're in with extracurricular activities, and they have a strong sense of family. It may not be a 2-parent family. It may be their mother, grandmother. It can be anybody in the family. It can be your church family. You just have to have that connection. And that was this is recent research, but Bonnie Bernard did research, and she did a 30-year longitudinal study. Now, I have a problem with research sometimes because it's not that social research. It may be an intervention. But Bonnie Bernard followed a group of children for 30 years, and the ones who were the most successful as an adult understood setting goals, and they understood planning. And having that knowledge in schools should help prevent a lot of our problems. So what is poverty? In the United States, a family of 4, $24,600, and if you're below the median average salary is $59,345. So in Alabama, you can be a school teacher in Alabama and have, I forgot, 2 or 3 children, and you qualify for free reduced lunch because of what the poverty line is. Okay, so the answer to the question, how do we make them visible? Through relationships. We have to know our students, we have to know our families, we have to know our communities, and we have to be willing to do those home visits. And, you know, like I said, I was in Trenton and Tulane Court, and my first year I didn't do home visits by myself because nobody knew me in the community, and it was a little bit scary out there. So I would take someone with me, a teacher usually, and then after the parents and the families got to know me, I didn't mind going. But you learn so much from doing those home visits and just talking with your students, making time to get to know them, meeting them at the front door. Some things are just so easy and don't cost anything. Just greeting them in the morning and making sure they get in that breakfast room to get breakfast before they go and try to learn for the day. Okay, that little girl is me. I was a little girl who came from poverty, single family home for the most part, which is kind of funny. I'm with my daddy here, but I didn't have any pictures of my mom. I guess she was working. But she worked, raised 5 kids pretty much by herself with the help of my grandmother. When things would get rough, we would go stay with grandma for a while. And of course, that goes with that definition of homelessness. Didn't know I was homeless. I had my grandma, but when I would go to my grandma's, there was no running water, no indoor plumbing, so you'd go to the well and draw water. I didn't think, it was just so much fun being at my grandma's house. I knew that I was loved, and when you have a mom who's working to take care of 5 kids, sometimes you may not get that special attention, and so I was number 4 out of 5, so by that time, you know, hey, my older sisters were out doing all their teenage things, and my brother, so, you know, I had grandma to look after me and to do things with me. I was the first person, neither of my parents graduated high school. I was the first person to go to college. Now my youngest sister does teach special education in Huntsville, Alabama, and I have 2 nieces who are teachers. So we have broken that cycle. All of them have graduated. I have 32 great nieces and nephews, and the ones who have come up the way, who are at that level, are graduated. We don't have any dropouts so far. And it's just so interesting to see how far you can come, and that's why I'm so passionate about working with students and talking to students, because I know when you come from poverty, although it's rural poverty, it's different poverty than inner city. When you come from rural poverty and you're the first one to go to college, you're the first one to graduate college and work in education, and I just kept working my way up to I finished with my doctorate in Auburn in '94, I believe, and then became an assistant principal, and I just have such a passion for working with students who come from poverty because I know what it can do, and I can witness and testify to it. So it is a very passionate thing to me. It's something that is totally in my heart. And of course, if I was teaching class, I love my quotes, so we would do small group activity now. But Brian Stevenson, who is the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, we had his the Common Core book, the Common Core, a few years ago, and he came to speak. And even though I knew I was going to be a fan, I love the book. When I heard him say the opposite of poverty is justice, that stung me, and that stayed with me. And it's been years since I heard him say it, and I still can't get that out of my mind. So it's true. And of course, you can't have a poverty talk without Gandhi. Poverty is the worst form of violence. And that one, you know, think about that. Gandhi's quotes are usually pretty well stated. You read it, be the change you want to see in the world, and yeah, I get that. But when you say poverty is the worst form of violence, that's a great conversation starter. And then good old Mother Teresa. I would have been a Mother Teresa if I didn't need electricity and hot water to take a shower and indoor plumbing. I admire so much her work. And I'll end with this. We think sometimes that poverty is only being hungry, naked, and homeless. The poverty of being unwanted, unloved, and uncared for is the greatest poverty. We must start in our own homes to remedy this kind of poverty. Thank you, Mother Teresa, Gandhi, and Brian Stevenson. And that's my contact information. I don't have any questions slide, but I can say any questions.